Hello everyone and welcome to another Dead Sleep Triple Terror feature. I hope you enjoy these spooky stories and have sweet dreams. Story 1. If you hear tapping on your window, don't look. I only looked once. The first time I heard tapping on my window, it was very faint and very slow. Slowly turning around in my bed, my eyes focused on the window, and I regret it now. If I just hadn't looked, so much could be different. The sight made the skin around my eyes stretch backwards and away further than they'd ever gone. My mouth widening to release the loudest scream, but no noise coming out. My pupils growing thinner until they were mere dots. My neck pushing backwards to get away. We stared for minutes. I discounted it as a bad dream. The next day, just before midnight, I clearly heard steps outside my window, like a horse galloping. I shoved my head under my blanket and tried my hardest to still myself. The tapping began. It was louder and faster than last time. Minutes pass and the tapping stops. When I wake up the next day, I walk around to the backyard. Beneath my window, there are large footprints. Large enough to fit my palm spread out with a bit of space still left. They're in front of my window, but nowhere else, as if they just came into existence. I called the cops. They arrived later that night and stand guard. The tapping never came that night. I fell asleep in peace, and a clutch of hope tells me things are going to be fine. Eventually, the cops leave. I wake up in the middle of the night. It's pitch black outside. I heard loud, disgruntled tapping on my window. The tapping is much more forceful than before. I can hear the window shaking. I know something is staring at the little lump in the bed with sullen eyes. The large pit in my stomach told me so. I don't know why, but I'm still. It feels comfortable, I guess. A delusion telling me it can't see me if I'm just still enough. But I can't help but breathe, and the breathing makes me rock slightly up and slightly down. The tapping stops, eventually, and when I wake up, I feel like a wreck. I call the cops again, but this time they're not nearly as precipitant. Things can't go on like this, I think to myself, and head out. There's a forest beside my house. It's filled with close trees, lush leaves, green and orange bushes, and tall, thick grass. I know the tapping comes from there. I know it for a fact, if I can find where the tapping comes from. I put on my thick green jacket and heavy black boots and snatch my camera. The tracks must have been hidden, but not perfectly. I see trampled plants, broken sticks, destroyed mushrooms. This would look common in any other scenario, but to me, right now, it's clues. I see a cave opening. It's a black door of air rimmed by gray pointy stone. I hear a distinct noise as I approach it. It sounds like an old man with a high-pitched voice, heaving loudly. I've never heard anything like it. My gut feels sick. The sound is just wrong. I take a step into the cave. My leg disappears into the cold abyss as if the darkness bit it off. A spark of energy shoots through my body. Everything in me is begging me not to go in. I take a few steps and the darkness envelops me. I tread, feeling my way forward. And then my legs hit up against something, and I tumble down the cave until I hit up against a wall. The heaving turned into heavings. I could hear it all around. I grabbed my camera and took a shot towards the noise. The flash lit up the corridor. I caught my gasp. On the floor, layers of people with horns lay asleep. Their feet are covered in goat hair. I got a picture. I'm getting out. I permanently put on the light to not step on anyone, and I slowly snuck my way out of the cave. As I was about to exit the cave, I saw a distracting light and accidentally stepped on a pebble. I heard the pebble fall down the cave and bump into something. The creature wakes up with a shriek, waking everyone else up. I sprint away. I'm sitting in my living room covered by my blanket and I'm shaking. I don't know what to do. They stop tapping. They're banging. They're banging on my door. They're banging on every window. Some of them are screeching. Their banging grows louder and louder. Their screech is more horrible. I feel like they're going to shatter my windows any second now. I'm breathing too fast, hyperventilating. It goes out and in. I can't control myself. Just stop. Please stop. I'll remove the pictures, I swear. I hear sirens in the distance. The banging stops. I hear them running toward the forest. Thank God, I'm saved. My neighbor had called the cops. I fumble out to explain what happened. I can barely describe the thoughts in my head when the officer grabs my shoulder and tells me to calm down. I show him the pictures on my phone. He looks at them curiously before dismissing them as fake. They drive away. I'm not sure what to do. I don't know what they want from me. I'm sitting on my chair, staring at my window. I don't care anymore. I'll look them in the eyes, recognize them. I can't live the rest of my life in fear. I cannot, and I will not. The clock ticks. Each second draws us closer to midnight. I feel myself want to get into bed and cover my head, but no, I won't do it this time. I'm going to look, even if it's the end of me. I will look. I blink, and they're all standing there. 5 large, tall, hollowed-out faces staring right at me. We make eye contact, but I hold my ground. They're angry. They're showing their teeth. They bring their large, rotten hands up to the window. Nails that have grown for ages are on them. They bang, and for 3 minutes they're banging on my window. A sprick appears on the window like lightning, then another one, and then the window shatters. They reach for me with their long hands and grab me, pulling me out. I scream and jerk and kick, but it doesn't matter. I'm one of them now. I don't know what they did exactly, but I've changed. I'm no longer human. I no longer have 5 fingers. I feel my consciousness, my humanity fading away. I'm typing this up on my phone whilst I still can. I have a warning for all of you. If you hear tapping on your window, don't look. Story 2. Excerpts from my uncle's journal, days before his death. Growing up in the 60s, my father was much too young to have been drafted during the war in Vietnam. He was too young to even remember the time before his brother was shipped off to join the military's efforts in Vietnam. But once his brother Henry returned, he knew something was off. Soldiers called it shell shock, though we now identify it as post-traumatic stress disorder. Henry, like countless others, was a casualty of war in a way that reached beyond a young death in a jungle. The war came home with him, and Henry took his own life in 1978. Henry became a recluse and serial drunk upon his return, often refusing to talk about his time in the military. The following are excerpts from a personal journal that was found in his belongings. My father held on to this book for decades, but never could stomach the thought of reading it. Maybe he was right. February 24th, 1978. Cold today. Woke with bitter taste in my mouth and pain in my back. Had a nightmare. The same one as usual. I'm back in the shit. Cut off from the platoon, gotta cut through 15 miles of man-eating insects and poisonous jungle towards Saigon. Maybe I can catch up with the team. Can feel eyes on my back from every angle, and the trees are speaking a language I don't understand. I scraped up a couple useful phrases during the war, but I could never get the hang of Vietnamese. I hear the screaming wings of mosquitoes the size of fists, the screeching of even more mountainous cicadas clung to trees. It eats me with suspense. I swear I could hear the screams of women between them. Suddenly, I clear the trees. I don't recognize the village. Damn fool I am. Can't read the fucking signs. I wander this empty village, lost for words. I passed what must have been a bar when I saw the thing watching me. Looked like the shape of a man. Large clouds of cigarette smoke funneled slowly from his mouth and wrapped about him before drifting listless in the thick summer air and dissipating. Locked eyes with him for a second. He turned and walked off into an alley. I had a momentary lapse of reason and chased after him. I call out to him in the silence and receive nothing. As I round the corner into the alley, a VC gorilla leaps out of the darkness at me, sticks a revolver in my face and turns my eyeball into a cloud. A red, wet cloud. That's when I woke up. Think I need more pills. February 25th, 1978. Slept like shit. Hungover. Same dream. Saw Hank for his birthday. Felt like he barely recognized me. At least we weren't fighting. Started getting sick. Had to leave. Visited Ted. Spent what I could on pills. He was concerned. Isn't his responsibility, I told him. Backed off. He's a good guy. Saw a ghost. Looked like a woman. Stared at me from a parked car. Her face was blurry, smudged, like my eyes knew I wasn't meant to see it. Seen a lot of ghosts since I've been home. February 26th, 1978. Different dream. Shady bar, somewhere in Laos. The type that the working girls flock to for easy money from the Americans. Never was much interested in the services. Friend of mine had caught something nasty on his first tour. Killed him. Walked into the smoky thick air of the building, sweat clinging to my face and chest. Empty room, it seemed. Bartender stared at me. Couldn't see his face. Too dark. Stumble up to the bar. The bartender says something I fail to understand, and as I approach, I get my first good look at him. A bullet had torn through his cheek and severely exposed teeth and muscle. A second bullet had stricken his eye and caused it to bloat and erupt with hideously yellow pus and fluids. It sat amidst a larger mess of purple and red gore that made up the upper right corner of his head. He spoke again. "See you soon, pal." Woke up after that. Couldn't find the pills I bought. Settled for several bottles of liquor. Missed the dope in Saigon. Pissed the day away in a haze. February 28th, 1978. Lost a few days. Must have been a blackout. Too much to drink. Woke up in a cold, outside. I was laying in a hole dug about 1.5 feet into the dirt in my backyard. Had dead candles and an arrangement of half-drunk whiskey bottles around me. Looked like a burial rite. Saw a couple of those back in the war. Saw a little too much death back then. Still doesn't fail to put me on edge. I've been dry maybe 12 hours and want to puke. Not sure I can keep up with my own habits. March 1st, 1978. Had a different nightmare. It felt like I'd woken into the dream, shocked awake by my bedside lamp being flicked on. It was the man from the bar. In this moment, up close, his wounds appeared much more wet and grave. Muscle pulled and throbbed under the open air between bone and flesh, sliding unnaturally and yet in a way that must have been natural. I was no medic. I never saw muscles like that in action. He wore a pale blue suit, black tie, yellow undershirt, all with black pinstripes save for the tie, which had yellow pinstripes. A massive trailing stain of blood and bits decorated much of the front of his suit. his right shoulder almost entirely coated. The blood glistened and gleamed under the blue light peeking in through the blinds. He smoked a cigarette tucked between bloody fingers as he leaned back in a chair and gazed at me callously, malice in his eyes. I suddenly had a thought which felt revelatory in the moment, though which should have been obvious. I know this man. Well, knew him. At least his face was familiar. I couldn't place where, but I had indeed seen him before. He stood before me regardless, bits of eye and skull showing in all their respective glories. He spoke. "Transmission from the dead, pal?" I choked out a, "Who are you?" "You killed me." He said it so bluntly. It hit my head like a rock. There's no way I could have killed him. I killed plenty, but only in the war, only Viet Cong. I could tell through the disfigurements this man wasn't Vietnamese. I was stricken mute in disbelief. He chuckled coldly and said, "Typical." He retrieved a shiny silver revolver from his coat and pointed it straight at my chest. "We're going for a walk, pal." The walk into the desert lasted seemingly for hours and sobered me to dull aches that made me feel like I was fully awake. I couldn't have been awake, could I? Dead people don't talk or show up in your room with a gun. Must have been a convincing nightmare, a terror maybe. My feet felt as they were bleeding. We stopped after a while, reaching the end of a row of shallow dug graves tucked into the desert dirt. The series of superficial tombs extended far into the dunes, far beyond my sight. He ordered me into the closest grave. I was in no position to argue. We both stared out into the purple hue of the desert night for a few moments while the man puffed his cigarette. "You know, I was so fucking close to achieving my life's work, my masterpiece." He took a final drag from his cigarette and flicked it into the grave to the right of me. "Do you know how long it took me to spill that much red paint? I would have been a myth old housewives tell their whore daughters about to keep 'em docile." He turned suddenly, his body language becoming more erratic and loose, not like his smooth demeanor previously. He looked right at me. "Do you know how fucking hard it is to choke a woman to death, pal? You took it all from me." He appeared grim under the oppressive dark of the night. He clicked back the hammer of his revolver, and it glimmered faintly. He came much closer and kneeled to face me. "All gone in fucking seconds because of you." My mouth hung open. I couldn't speak. He scoffed at me and stood up, pointed the revolver right in my face. Told me, "Keep playing ignorant, doesn't matter. You'll find out soon enough." Then he watered the desert with the contents of my head. Woke up in the shallow hole in the backyard again, feet bloody, headache, starting to loathe sleep. March 2nd, 1978. Caught some sleazy murder show last night, New Mexico Ripper. Few years ago, guy used to strangle women, cut them up, sent letters to the cops, never caught. Funny coincidence, considering. My days are running out. I thought I saw the man from the bar at the end of the hall, mind playing tricks. Found cigarette ash and remains seared into the bedside table. Don't smoke. Haven't slept. The liquor is running thin. I'm loathing the next few days. March 3rd, 1978. I saw him last night. He came to me. Flesh, blood, the whole bit. There's still some of him on the floor. Told me he'd grown impatient, said the vengeful ghost shtick was a little too slow burn for him. I'm inclined to agree. Sick of this haunted house show. He threw his cigarette down and smeared it into the carpet with his foot. Then he took that shiny revolver and beat me in the head with it. Head still bleeding. This was real. Slipped into a dream of things all too familiar. Smoky, crowded bar, crippling paranoia. judgment, sensory extremes in all angles. I fall in and out of my body at odd pace. I become sick. I rush through the assortment of blurry-faced creatures writhing about each other and sipping their medication. I emerge into the fresh air and immediately vomit, the sensation of nausea continuing to slip its cold grasp into my skull. I feel my throat screaming to pull itself inside out, to escape the sensation. I feel myself stumble into a stranger. In my hazy staggering, he pushed me backward, and the adrenaline took over for me. It was over before I could even have known it started. Instinct drove my hand to my hip, snatching my pistol from its rest and jamming it into the guy's cheekbone. It rained teeth. I couldn't control my arms. Reflex drove back to the hammer and fired the second bullet into his eye socket, shredding his face open. Then the third. Funny to say, I didn't recognize the man until I destroyed his facial structure. I recognized him now. I recognized the feeling in my gut when I'd seen him these past few nights. By the time the full realization had soared in my gut, I was pulled from the dream. Woke up in the yard again, in the grave. Found the man's revolver in the kitchen. Left a note for me too. See you soon, pal. I won't let him come for me. He can't have me. Not if I can get myself first. I won't be the bitch of some whore-killing coward. I own my fate. I earn my right to die. He won't take that from me. There would be no entry for March 4th, as Henry committed suicide by self-inflicted gunshot wound in the early hours of the morning. Entries in the journal are believed to be trauma-related delusions, though a police investigation has drawn comparisons between a homicide in the New Mexico area sometime in the early 70s and the murder described in Henry's final entry. Henry would have lived in the area at the time, living with my father's family before shutting himself away. Police say a similar weapon was used, as well as the injuries which were described with great accuracy. No further statements were given, and it all quieted down by the time I was born. Can't help but wonder what really happened on the 4th. Story 3. I had the strangest date. Last week, I had the weirdest dating experience in my life. Just to put everything into context, I'm not crazy about the online dating thing, but I'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship and figured, why not? I end up matching with this gorgeous woman, who I'll refer to as Daisy. Daisy and I start talking, and at first, she seems really cool. We eventually decide to meet up at a spot near her, roughly an hour away from where I live. Finding a parking spot took longer than expected, so when I finally arrive, I'm thinking I'm gonna have to apologize for being late. Unfortunately, I see that Daisy was nowhere to be found. To add insult to injury, all of my texts and calls go unanswered for the next 10 minutes. This, in turn, leads to the assumption that I've been stood up. Annoying, but not the first time it's happened. Just as I'm about to leave, I see her rounding the corner in a stunning outfit. She's every bit as beautiful as I envisioned, which probably helped me forget the poor communications just seconds prior. Daisy explains that one of her friends was having an issue, and she needed to be there to calm her down. We continue on with the date, and everything seems cool. Daisy was a lovely girl, and we vibed the whole time. The only snag was her mentioning how she was looking for a father for her, quote, baby boy. Up to that point, she hadn't said anything about children, something that I, respectfully, am not looking for. I still have a lot to figure out in my own life, and I'm not just in a place where I feel comfortable being an adult figure in a child's world. I informed her that I wasn't the best person to be around children, and she just kinda laughed it off. She gave me a whole spiel about how I'd actually be great with kids and how I just needed to trust myself. Then she went on to explain how the quote, right woman would somehow bring out the father in me. Weird, but whatever. I asked if she was still close to the baby's dad, which leads to a tangent about how she thought she could make him into the perfect man, but he was too resistant to change. When asked more about this, she simply referred to trying to make all the pieces fit in his life a certain way, but ultimately, he couldn't be molded into what she wanted. Seeing that this was headed towards a toxic place, I opted to just change the subject and continue on with the night. By the time 11 o'clock rolled around, I was feeling exhausted and decided to head home. After saying our goodbyes, I go to find my car, but before I even get in, I see it's been vandalized. The headlights were smashed in, my tires slashed, and one of my windows was broken. Oddly enough, nothing was stolen. It just appeared as though someone had taken their anger out in my vehicle. Right as I'm about to call roadside assistance, I hear someone yelling my name. Lo and behold, Daisy just so happened to be driving right past. Unprompted, she decides to pull into the parking lot, and she immediately notices the damage. After inspecting my car for a few moments, she suggested that we go back to her place to hang out for a bit, and she can take me back after. At first, I was reluctant, but after looking at Uber and Lyft prices and hearing a convincing argument from Daisy about how bad Uber is in the area, I agreed. I got everything squared away with having my car towed, and we headed off to her apartment. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was how clean everything was. There wasn't a speck of dust or item out of order. When Daisy turned on the TV, it was already set to Netflix, and a bowl full of snacks were neatly placed on the table. It appears as though she were expecting company, but what I found the oddest was that there was no babysitter. What good parent leaves a baby completely unattended for hours at a time? When I asked about this, she simply laughed it off and made a comment about her son was too good to need someone to watch him, and how she didn't trust others in her home. Definitely weird, but I didn't necessarily feel comfortable lecturing her about how to raise her kid. Before picking a movie, she asked if I wanted to meet her son. Internally, the answer was absolutely not, but she was my free ride, so I opted for the most awkward sure I'd ever given. She disappeared into another room with a giddy scream and soon returned with a young boy wrapped in a blanket. She was whispering something to him and, with a loving smile, invited me to come over and say hello. I did as I was told and walked over to greet the baby. I went to peel back the blanket on what should have been a sleepy-eyed young boy, but my immediate reaction was to jump back and yip when, to my horror, I was met with the disgusting face of a decrepit porcelain doll. Its single eye rolled back into its skull, and a fat roach seemed to have made a home in its dislocated mouth. The once white skin was stained black, and various cracks around its head. For a moment, I genuinely thought this was some kind of horrible prank, but the look of love and acceptance on Daisy's face was authentic. She eyed the doll like any mother would their child, and the soft kisses she gave it solidified the fact that it didn't register what she was holding wasn't a human. She gave me a big smile and asked if I thought her boy was beautiful, and I couldn't even form a proper reply. I just fumbled my way into asking if I could use the bathroom. She nodded and casually pointed me to the bathroom in her room. I took the opportunity to half sprint down the hallway towards it. Instinctually, I locked the bathroom door behind me and splashed some water on my face, trying to sober myself up from this nightmare. When the reality of the situation hit, I stood there for minutes trying to think of a way to excuse myself from whatever the hell was going on. My thoughts, however, were interrupted by what sounded like a soft yet persistent crying noise. Thinking it was Daisy coming to check on me, I unlocked the door and cracked it open slightly. but didn't see anyone in the room. Curious, I cautiously made my way out of the bathroom, trying to keep as silent as possible, and followed the source to a walk-in closet. Preparing myself for the worst, I took a deep breath and slowly cracked open the door, where I was greeted by seemingly nothing. The only thing inside seemed to be a CPR dummy torso. Multiple pairs of differently shaped arms and legs were strewn about, along with various pairs of unorganized clothing. For a moment, I thought I was hearing things, or that it was a neighbor coming through thin walls. But suddenly, what I thought was an inanimate torso quickly turned his head towards me, let out a loud gasp for air, and shouted, "Help me! Oh God, please help me, I'm in so much pain." The shock and horror at the fact that this horribly disfigured person was alive nearly put me on my ass as I scrambled to slam the closet door shut. But it was too late. The man screaming had alerted Daisy, and I could hear her inquiring about what was happening from the other room. It was now or never. I burst down the hallway, pushed past a waiting Daisy at the door, and made my way outside, sprinting down the dark street until I physically couldn't go any longer. The last thing I heard was Daisy running after me, screaming, "Come back, please, our baby needs you, we'll die without you." The sound of her voice slowly died out, and the moment I felt she was no longer coming after me, I called an Uber and sat in their car in silence the rest of the way home. As soon as I arrived, I called the police and explained everything that went down that night. The next day, I tried to get a follow-up on what exactly had happened. To my shock, I was told that they found absolutely nothing. Just a young woman was living alone by herself. No kids, no torso in the closet, nothing. I didn't know how to take that information. I still don't. I know what I saw. And if Daisy's still out there hurting people, I don't know if I can live with the fact that she's free to meet other people and do horrible things to them. I would have assumed that the story ended there, but just the other night, I got a phone call. It was Daisy. She told me that our kid said his first word. Apparently, it was my name. She said that she loved me and that she and the boy missed me dearly, and then silence. The next day, I find a postcard in the mail that read, "Soon we're going to be looking at daycare. Thinking of finding one closer to you so that your commute from work is easier. Looking forward to seeing you soon. With love, Daisy." I never once mentioned where I live, and I'm terrified of what that means for me. If any of you are doing the online dating thing, please hear me out. Make sure that you're really, really damn careful about who you choose to connect with. That choice might stick with you forever.